there's value in there. I mean, there is value in being Black. And we can't, you know, this little light of mine, we can't let people put out our shine. You know, I'm gonna let it shine, and we got to keep letting it shine. I know that's corny, but that's exactly what I thought about. I do want to ask, has there been a protest gym or a protest fail, or just a gym and fail that you've seen in the news? It doesn't necessarily have to be related to the protests, but related to what's going on in the world. I know I saw something today on Instagram with little Black girl. She had braids, and she was going, no justice, no, like she was serious about it. And I was like, that is beautiful. That is like, she was like, no justice, no peace. And it's like, that's what it's about. It's like starting with the youth and exposing them to what's going on, and sharing that with the world. So that was my little gem. I was like, yes, little girl.
My gem.
We're here to protect you.
Was John Boyega.
Ooh. That one was good.
So good.
That one was beautiful.
First of all, the solidarity overseas has been insane. I think like 17, 18 countries. We've seen documented protests of people in the streets. But he is not playing games.
Right.
And I appreciate that. And I especially appreciate any Black man that will stand up and say, we have to protect our Black women. Because that is the truth.
That was good. I saw that. And you saw the rawness of the emotion in it. So, and I liked him in Star Wars. So
I've been a John Boyega stan for a while now, since Attack the Block.
Me too.
But
nobody had
extremely excited.
Like a meme. Say, did y'all ever? All right, I'll get.
All right, guys. I gotta go. Okay.
See you later, Jerry.
I gotta go. Bye, guys.
Bye, Jerry. Thank you for joining us.
This recording of Tamara. Oh, please. Oh, right. Of Tamara Mowry sitting with her sister saying, "They call me a white man's whore." And then somebody did a meme. They call me John Boyega's whore. Out of support and celebration of him doing that. But I thought I had two that I thought were major fails. I thought Madonna's son's interpretive dance was a little bit, and David Guetta, the music artist, putting "I Have a Dream" speech to a beat, and all these white people just bouncing to it.
The fuck out of here! Still.
I saw that. I think I saw it on Twitter.
It's insane. Yeah. And I'll say that like Jim.
You tell them to sit down and shut up. Just shut up. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No. I was just gonna say my gym is. So, and I mentioned a little bit earlier about, we need to all be willing to grow, and we need to not be afraid to grow. And so this morning I was on Twitter trying to get an update of what was going on in the world. And I found myself praying. And I was praying, I'm like, just a sense of like, and I was listening to music, and I was just saying like, I was listening to actually Tamala Mann's Take Me to the King, which was just like, really like, oh, this is such a good song. Like it's describing exactly how I'm feeling. And I feel like I'm in the presence of God. And as I'm scrolling through Twitter, I come upon this GoFundMe for homeless trans women in Atlanta. And I was so convicted, like literally, like I mean, it was like a faith affirming moment in the level of conviction that I had, meaning that I had been willing to donate to like, bail projects. And I was willing to talk about, Black men and Black women, and then ignoring, not out of necessary malice, but out of just ignorance, which is the root of ignoring that there are Black people who are suffering similarly to how I feel as a Black man, and ignoring their stories. And for me, it's a gem through social media that if you really I mean, and not even necessarily that I was searching to be educated, but in the presence of God, realizing that how can we say we want Black freedom if we're not willing to realize the whole spectrum of it. And so, I mean, and so I did with that what I did. And I just want to say that one of the things that when we look at solidarity, when we say solidarity, when we proclaim solidarity, it really requires us to go in and not even just say, do I have malice against somebody, but what am I doing to promote that person? Am I being a part of the solution? Because we can proclaim we want justice, we want freedom, and then ignore the unique plight that certain Black people go through. And so that for me was a gem of what social media can do in terms of highlighting and presenting issues.
If Black lives matter, then all Black lives need to matter. And I don't know if this is the time not for us to have this conversation with everything going on with the battle against systemic racism, but we're going to have to sit down and have a family chat, because I saw that video of DeJoiré and what happened. I don't know if y'all saw it.
You know,
but we can't keep letting this happen.
DeJoiré, I think that conversation has to happen now in tandem with what we're talking about. Because if we progress so far into this conversation of systemic racism and the criminal justice system, and we're leaving out trans Black people and queer, specifically trans Black people who are affected by these systems the absolute most, then like our conversations are skewed only in favor of cishet normatives, you know? And like, that's just like, then the conversation in itself is not an actual conversation, because we're still leaving our own half of ourselves out of the room. Like, that is part of who we are. And yeah, the Iyanla Dior video, I didn't watch it. I just looked up the details of what happened. But I was like, that's the ultimate like fucking protest fail of the whole movement. You know, like, I can't, like, that shook, like, that infuriates me to like no end. That like, to know that Black men would be like literally beating a Black woman to death, like almost to death. And like, I just cannot wrap my head around it, on why people cannot see how your life is intertwined with mine, or your life is a Black male's life is intertwined with a trans woman's life. Like I don't see how people miss that connect. Whatever like ethical, moral, religious, or whatever kind of views they are that like skew that for you, like you got to address that shit too. Like all of that has to be put on the table.
And Jarvis, not to say that you're responsible for providing the solution. And I think DeJoiré too, you've noted that it's a conversation that needs to happen. Not necessarily how, but where should the substance of that conversation be in terms of, maybe it is, how do we, what do we do within our own community? What do we need to do to dismantle it? Because I know that it's easy to pin it on people reading the Bible and getting a sense of this is right or that is wrong, but where do we attack that in terms of dismantling that within our community, and then ultimately bringing that to the forefront outside of our community as well?
Honestly, I don't know how someone makes another human being look at a human being and think human. Right. I don't know how you do that.
You say, sure.
I think part of it is at the family level is where you first learn most of these things. Like, that's your first instance of socialization. And I think that and I'm not going to only speak on Black households, because within the Black household, within the Black family, there's just been an unwillingness to have the conversation at all. So if you go through, they're not having it they're not having it at your house, they're not having it at your church, more like they're not having it in your schools. So what you're seeing from it is society, more or less. I think it has to start at the family level. Like, it has to start there. Because I think even as the way that we've been able to, I can speak for my family, the way that my family has been able to engage with like family members who are now openly gay. Oh man, 20 years ago, that was not about to be a thing. But now it's like, oh yeah. And we just met his fiance, or like, yeah, we just met his boyfriend, like, yeah, we just met her girlfriend. And it's like, oh, this is okay. And I think that that's where I put my faith in it happening, because I just don't have any trust in these other systems to make it happen if it can't happen at the family level.
I think that a lot of that conversation at the table, it's unfortunate, but it's okay for a woman to love another woman, but it's a difficult conversation to have if a male in my family decides that he wants to love another man, or he identifies as, trans or anything else. And that's a problem. And I'm just gonna say, all right, it's a problem. In my family, like, we knew who the studs were. That's how we call them. We knew who they were. We knew that cousin so-and-so was with her over there. But if it was about a male, it was like, oh no, that's a phase. Oh no, that's, oh no. Or we just know, we just never talk about it at all. So part of it is just having the conversation outright. And you learn through having the conversation, you learn through understanding. And I'm happy that we are hopefully getting to a place where it's now a little bit more visible. The conversations are they're being had. I don't think they're being had in the rate in which they need to be had, but it's our responsibility again to talk to the younger generation about, you can be who you want to be, you can love who you want to love, and there's no condemning that. You just love them. You just love them for who they are, period.
And it goes even a step further, is that you can be whatever you want to be, and then he or she can be whoever they want to be. That it's not just limited to just me and saying that I can do it, and that but that I need to have an affirmative fight in my spirit for the person next to me also.
Right.
And I think that's exactly it. And it starts at the family too.
I want to jump in because I think that, and I'm prefacing this to say I am not minimizing the discussion that needs to happen, but I will say from what I've seen in my perception is that to begin to broach this conversation, like Deji was just saying, like, she doesn't know how to make people understand that you need to value people. Mm-hmm. I think by entertaining the complexities of how people justify the value on someone's life is what makes having that conversation difficult, right? Like, I think that in order to get people to understand that Black trans lives matter, that Black queer lives matter, it's the fact that Black lives need to matter, period. And getting people to understand, like, you don't get to pass judgment on how much someone's life has value. It is just on the ounce of their humanity, right? Like, you are a human being, so that their life has to matter, and you don't get to pass that judgment. And I think that's how you begin to broach the conversation of getting people and family members to understand and to be open enough to even listen as to what Black people of intersecting identities are experiencing, right? I think that coming from a homophobic family, like, Africans, still have laws overseas, especially in areas of laws overseas that will kill you if, what's that?
It's that they have them here too.
Right. And formalized, right? And people place value on that based just off of religion, off of the state laws, off of how their own perception of how one begins to live their life, right? So I don't want to say that we can't have complex conversations of whose life matters, but I think to begin it, to get people to understand that they need to at least listen and absolve themselves of being the judge, jury, and executioner of who gets to live, even within our community, right? I think that's where it needs to begin. And it's a hard ass conversation to get people to say, like, this life just matters. It doesn't matter what your perception is. It doesn't matter what your thoughts are. It doesn't, like, who they are does not matter. It is their life matters. Now we can talk about, like, why what society is doing to them is so wrong and why you're contributing to that, right? But I think, like, entertaining the complexities of how people make sense of who gets to live and who doesn't, I think that's, like, a difficult hump to get over. So
how much of this is directly connected to emotional intelligence?
I don't think it's I think what I'm saying is, like, has to do with what you're saying, DeJoiré. Let me know if it does or doesn't. But I think part of it is, if we're talking about, like, where do we start, is coming from Black men also have to deal with their trauma of, like, being institutionally, like, left out of, like, modes of mobility. And, like, anything that threatens, like, Black masculinity is then seen as a threat. And I think that goes into the conversation of why, like, being Black and gay is different from Black gay men is different from Black gay women or lesbian women, is because, like, that idea of, like, a Black man not being able to contribute to, like, his people or to his community, like, by procreating or, like, being the man of the house in that sense, is, like, very difficult for some people to, like, break out of that, because it's been taken away from them for so long that you feel like, oh, I have to, like, own something. I have to have something. And if you can't have that, like, in your own home, in your own family, in your own community, you feel like you've lost something. But yet and still, that ain't on me. Like, not no more. Like, that's not my responsibility to make you feel like a man. Like, that's your own job to do that. And there is a sense of, like, emotional, what's the word you use? Like, lack of emotional intelligence. And, like, coming to that understanding that, like, it's just, like, it can no longer be about the patriarchal hierarchy of, like, Black man, Black woman, Black kids, and then everybody else is, like, somewhere under that if they're seen at all. It's like, yeah, that model cannot work. It does not work. There's anything that keeps you in this same box, in this same system that you say you're trying to, like, that is oppressing you. Like, so for me, it's like all of that has to be broken down. I think it really starts with listening. The same way we're telling the government and white people and the state and everybody who's not Black to listen to us, listen to our rage, listen to our pain. I think the voices of Black trans folks have to be amplified as well. Like, listen to their rage, listen to their pain, listen to their history, like, because it's a part of our history. And if we can't recognize that, then, you know what I mean, the gig is up. Like, we can't. Yeah.
I had an experience, and this goes back to the family part. And as I was thinking about it, I was like, do I tell this story or not? So, because it puts me in the story. But there's a person I grew up with who's now identifies as a trans woman. And correct me if I get any of the wording incorrect. And the name that she identifies now, I'm not gonna say her name, but it's clear she identifies with a new name. So as we were discussing a separate issue regarding our upcoming school board elections it's in New York. The person I was talking to kept referring to her by her old name. And then I kept saying, I'm not even correcting them, but just like, you know what, okay, I'll just say it again, and then maybe they'll catch on. And then I would say it, and then they would say it again. And I'm like, first off, why do you have to keep saying the name in it anyway? Or like, why do you think we're talking about a different person? And then I'm like, we both know who we're talking about. And you know that that's how that person identifies. So this went back and forth with me being like, no, surely they'll catch on. And then I eventually had to, and this is to the part about, like, eventually just having to have the conversation. I was like, like, that's disrespectful, right? Like, that's not, like, they've said how they identify, you know it. Like, they've told you, I've seen them tell you, you see me telling you. Is there a particular reason why you're saying it this way? Like, oh, well, no, I only thought you had to say it when, like, you were talking to them. And I'm like,
sometimes that's a real bridge to cross over.
no, but that's what I'm saying. But from that conversation, that person does know now. Like, from that, that person does
to educate them.
So I just felt like it was like time to, because they're not always going to be, in my mind, like these large. I'm not imagining like at Thanksgiving everybody sits down and then all right, folks, let's go around the table, let's break this thing down. I think it'll be moments like that where it's like, this person just truly didn't know. So, and at first I was like, do they not know, or are they purposely being this way? And it's like, well, no, they didn't know. And I was like, okay, well, now you know. And now my hope is that the next time he hears it, he's like, oh no, she goes by blank. And I think it's just like just an example of like moving the needle forward. Like you don't want change to be too slow, because then you're not really going anywhere. Right. But I do acknowledge that the needle is moving forward, at the very least, incrementally. So
I think the difficult thing, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
I think the difficult thing about the burden of educating other people is that you have to understand where they are and why they don't know or why they believe something. And that's a struggle.
Right.
You are a person who just isn't in that space. I don't know how to get there. Nothing in my brain connects, like your story you just said, Kayshawn. Nothing in my brain connects. I call them one thing in their face and another in private. Like I don't get it. I don't know how to bridge that gap myself between where you are and where I am.
Versus, like, when somebody says, my name is X, now I use, like, if I change my name to Bernard and y'all continue to call me Andrew, and I said, no, my name is Bernard, and that's how I want to, Bernard. How do I convince y'all, to call me, how do I convince somebody who does not want to call me Bernard, who does not want to call me Bernard to call me that? And how do you get them to feel it and sense that is incorrect? Yeah. How do you teach that level of that respect? Maybe it's a level of respect.
That was exactly what I was thinking. Because if you decided right now that you only wanted to be called Drew, and never wanted to be called Andrew again, if I was determined to only call you Andrew, it's because I don't respect you. Like that has to be. There can't be any other disconnect there. It's not like I don't know. It's like I'm calling him Andrew because his mother named him Andrew. There has to be like an actual thing there. It's a conscious decision that I'm making. That's like, this is what this person wants, and I refuse to give them what they want. I can't wrap my head around that part.
And how to make people respect other people and their rights and their space. If we found out, I'm sure, we'd solve racism, but like, how do you convince somebody unless they want to? And not to condemn anybody, because that's not what I don't have any authority to do, but it's just a suggestion in saying that maybe some people are bad. And in lowercase b, bad, in terms of they have an unwillingness to respect other people's rights because they value so much what they have and how they view things that they can't respect other people. And that's just a suggestion, not that I'm calling people bad. I'm just saying maybe is that a part of human nature, or maybe a part of somebody's physiological or metaphysical being?
I don't know if respect catches it all. I think it's I will always go back to it is not a form of respect to recognize somebody's humanity, right? I think it is, to your point, Drew, or your example, I think like you wanting to go by a different name can be a level of, you know, that part of that is respect. But the other part of it, especially in the Black community, we know that names are very important, right? And that is because if you have a quote unquote difficult name to pronounce, a lot of us have spent with someone who has a difficult name, a lot of us have spent our lives with our names being warped. And people did not try to call us by our name in correct pronunciation, right? But when I see you call when I see you call someone else's name and pronounce it correctly, what does that now message to me about how you see me as a person, right? It has nothing, like you could respect me physically. You can see me, you can say, excuse me when you walk past me, you can consider me in like the flesh, but when you don't call me by my name or recognize who I am, I don't think that's respect. That is, do you see me as a person worth recognizing? Right. And I think that's the discussion that we are struggling to have with people. When I said, like, we need to get people to stop talking about the complexities on the very minimum to begin to understand, like, when you make these conditionals about who this person is or whether or not, you know, they are worthy of walking down the street, or, oh, they live this life, or I don't agree with this. None of that matters. I need you to understand my humanity in this, right? And then we can talk about how you have minimized my humanity. Once you understand, we can't have this discussion if you don't look at me as a person. And in this country, if you don't have white skin, if you are not cisgendered, if you are not middle class or high or upper class, then your humanity is questioned by somebody, whether it is a white person, whether it is another Black person, because we haven't talked about how anti-Black dictates a lot of how we interact with each other, right? Whether or not you are Christian, all of these normative identities have questioned whether or not you can be human, right? And I don't think that's respect, it's something deeper. So when we're talking about how do we begin to get people to understand or have these discussions of oppression within our own communities, right? Having these intersectionality identities and how we are minimized in our oppression because of it, because someone else has to validate our oppression, right? All of that is tied into whether or not you see me as a human. And I think that is the frustration that we have felt as Black people for the last month. When I said, like, we are at a crossroads where we are encouraged by people, you know, going out and trying to educate themselves, going out and buying, you know, how to be anti-racist, white fragility, all of that. But then we have instances in Minnesota with Ayanna where we're like, and then like, that is the protest fail, right? And then we see differences in like Black people and how they respond to the protest, right? When people were rioting and Black people are like, this is not how we do it, right? And we have other Black people who are like, people over property, what are you talking about? There's so many, these complex conversations and conditionals that we try to have to justify whether or not we're doing something correctly is grounded in people validating your humanity. And that is what oppression is based off of. That's how white supremacy works.
Oh, I love that.
I think validating your humanity and your identity. I was just thinking, because like, call me by your name. Like, what is a name? A name is your identity. I see myself as Kristin Watson. I don't see myself as another name. If I did change my name to something else, I would see myself as that. But you not, as you said, recognizing that, and you not respecting that, but just blatantly denying that is denying that person, denying that humanity. And that is tied to sexuality. That is tied to all of the complexities that, as you said, that we can't begin to break down, but takes time to break down. And I think, and the root of it, in my opinion, is education, but also like, when do we start? When do we start, and where do we start educating one another?
And I think one of the things to both of your points, it's fundamentally, maybe we don't understand, and to DeJoiré's initial point about emotional intelligence, we possibly do not do enough talking or thinking about humanity and what the nature of humanity and the specialness in humanity, because like it's deep, as you said, it's deeper than just treating or thinking of somebody well or respecting them. It's about understanding that the way that you see yourself and the value that you ascribe to your own existence, somebody else feels the same about that existence, about their own existence, and you should be able to respect that value that they have of existence. And sometimes maybe we don't value our own existence enough, or we don't think about, or we don't care to look and understand what is the privilege of living and being and the opportunity to be alive. And I mean, not just necessarily, I'll say this for me, in my own evolution of thinking about things and people and valuing people, it's rooted to moral imperative that I am valued by God. And because God values me, I can understand that God values other people. And that's where I root my understanding of humanity and value, is that you are valued and that there is a requirement to your value. But I think we all everybody needs to be thinking, where does your value come from? Where does the importance of your humanity and your existence, where does that rely? And I think those things, it's hard to teach and even to encourage, because I think sometimes we want to talk about hard facts. We want to teach our kids about math and history and science, things that tangibles. How do we teach them to think beyond just the tangible of life to more of like the facts, that the realities of existence?
Round this back around to Blackness. Go ahead, Jarvis. And
I was just gonna follow up on Andrew's comment and the whole thing that got us started when you were saying about finding that tweet about the Black trans women's fund to donate to, or whichever one it was. I'm just kind of wondering, like, in being convicted and doing that, and like having like a opening of sorts and doing that, what do you feel like it was before that moment that was like because you're a very intelligent man and you're a very aware man and you're a very open and loving person, but what do you feel like it was, like, the thing that cut you off from fully like seeing the Black trans story, or like in that particular perspective?
I'll say, I know for me this past week, as I've been watching protests, this has been where my spirit has been, in trying to really tie down for myself intellectually and emotionally, why is racism so offensive to me? And that was already where I was at for this week, and that's why it was primed to happen, being in this moment. But I think prior to now, it's distraction. Distraction was key. That, I mean, and this is something that I've definitely recognized through being in quarantine and isolation, is how much we distract ourselves and move through lives and will allow ourselves to intellectually acknowledge something, meaning intellectually, I know trans people have rights and should be respected, and that their lives matter. But the emotional component of understanding that, the sense of realizing from heart to heart, you are a person just like me, I think it's because I'm in that space personally. And I think we can sometimes, one of the things that moving forward when I'm approaching issues, and because this is, I mean, believe it or not, I mean, for a fairly emotional person, an emotive person, which I am, I can sometimes stop at the intellectual and say, all right, you understand it. I understand that people deserve rights. I understand that Black women should be respected. I understand things, but to really sink it into you, you have, I think for me at least, I had to emotionally connect it to realize, to see there was a blind spot in me not having the sense of feeling to operate from. Because what I think is racism is an emotional response. It's not intellectual. It doesn't make sense. It can be peeled apart, similar to prejudice against women, against trans people. those things can be intellectually peeled apart. The question is, are we going to allow the emotions that we have about it? Are we going to allow ourselves to feel more kindly in the value of other people, to actually sense the value of other people, as opposed to just knowing they have value? I can look at you and it's easy for y'all because we're friends and I know y'all and we've been in a relationship for me to see your value. But when I see a stranger, can I see their value? When I see the racist, can I see that there is value? There is accountability. There needs to be accountability. But can I recognize that inherently there is value? And I feel like I would have done better in my philosophy classes if I had gotten this sooner.
I wish Jasmine was on the call so I could make fun of her. She slept in our philosophy class, but that's not the point.
She is not here to defend herself.
I know.
Sleeping classes.
We slept in that one and didn't go to Spanish class. That's what me and Travis did for 2 years.
No.
Oh man, that's a lot of classes we slept in.
I wanted to ask a rhetorical question. It seemed like you had a point. Go ahead, Nardos.
Yeah.
Finger.
Yeah. It might end up being a solid conversation, so I'm not going to pose it as a question. Maybe something to talk about next week. But Drew, you're talking about like, can you see the value in another person even if you don't know them? Is seeing the value in somebody the same thing as valuing someone inherently? Right? And we don't have to have that conversation now because I think
that's a good question.
No.
You gonna throw it out there and say shut up.
I said
start talking about it.
First, Nada's gonna dangle the carrot because I say I'm gonna have to get off soon.
Cliffhanger.
She over here dropping bombs right before we hang up.
Right. I mean, shout out to like school and being able to talk about racism.
Right?
Look, speak on it because the way these protests in May going, I did not touch a proposal. So, but no, I asked that because like I also I'm very cognizant of language when we talk about especially people, because it does change how you think about you know how you value people versus see their value, because I think that's part of the problem when we say, you know, I'm a Black person, I have a degree from Georgetown, how could this happen to me? It's like, all due respect, your degree don't mean nothing, right? Like, it shouldn't mean anything in this context. Like, one, it don't save us, because we all know. But in that second hand, like, if something happens to someone, they're just like, you know, it's a conversation with Black people being murdered by whomever. They're like, how could this happen? You know, Breonna Taylor was an EMT and she did all these great things. And yes, she absolutely did. But that should not be the reason why we value her life. That should just be, we value Breonna Taylor because we do, right? So I just we can have that conversation later, but go ahead, Toddy.
All right, teacher. All right, doctor.
I think it's a great segue to the rhetorical question that I was going to go into. If we are having a hard time internally as a Black people in defining our Blackness and understanding the complexities of our intersectionalities, then how do we get the majority to understand and respect and appreciate and value Black lives?
Almost to Nados' point, do they have to? Do you have to understand all the complexities of a Black life to value it? Is that because if that's what we're trying to get to,
that's why it's a rhetorical question. Okay. It's like, you know, when we are
get the juices flowing.
I know.
I'd say no.
We should talk more about it, though. We should dive into it because.
Okay, I'll give it the first point. My point is, if we can acknowledge right here, if we can acknowledge here, and I'm sure we've acknowledged in other spaces, there is no just this is what Black looks like. This is like it's complex. It looks like this. It looks like that.
There's no one Black.
There's no one Black.
Right.
We can all acknowledge that point, which I think as long as other people can also, if we could, that's to me that's like the floor. If you don't have to understand all the complexities I don't understand all the complexities of what Blackness looks like. I've had my particular upbringing. That's the way it looks to me. my education looks a certain way to me. I don't have to understand it all to be able to acknowledge this Blackness is complex. And I don't want to, I think that, I appreciate the question. I think it was perfectly phrased. To then have to put that on, this goes back to DeJoiré's point earlier, to then have to take that and now educate other people on the complexities of Blackness just to get them to a place where they can appreciate and understand the value of just me being a person, I think is like, that may be too tall of an order in my mind, but that's just in my mind. There are PhDs on the call. So.
And just to clarify what I was saying about my approach to understanding trans women, it's less of ever denying that there was ever a right. It's that it's a simple thing. That's the intellectual. Mm-hmm. It's the side of seeing the value and appreciating that and recognizing in a time of protest that if you're silent, you're consenting was one part of it. If I'm silent about what's happening in Trans Lives Matter, Black women, Black trans people's lives, then I'm consenting to the violence against them. But also understanding that, recognizing the value, that's necessarily for me a bigger step, a more of a taking something from being intellectual to emotional. And meaning, not everybody has to do that. That's not something I'm saying you don't have to emotionally feel that me as a Black man need to have rights. You don't need to. You need to acknowledge it intellectually, and you need to and recognizing that your silence about it is also consenting to me not being treated right. So it's two-step for you don't have to get to that third one that I was waxing poetical about, but you do have to acknowledge the first two, I think. You have to intellectually say that you have this right, and then you have to use your voice to support it. Because if you're not, you're consenting to the fact that I'm being disrespected. And I think that's true for everybody and everybody's rights.
This isn't common. So,
Can I say one thing? I want to just one small thing. I know. I want to, I'm going to side with Kayshawn on this and saying like, understanding humanity is the bar is on the floor with that, right? I think you need to understand or recognize humanity before you can have these complex conversations. Because without having these complex conversations of how Black trans lives have been silenced and marginalized and minimized, you cannot change how this appears on a day-to-day and in systems and in policies and institutionally, right? Like you can't. So like I say all that to say we need to understand and recognize humanity. We need to be critically conscious that this is how we operate. But that conversation still needs to be had. We can't all lives matter this conversation because then you minimize people's experiences and oppression, and you will then recreate it and uphold it because you say, oh no, all Black lives matter. We're just gonna treat everyone equally. That is not equity, right? So like I implore you to think recognizing one's humanity is the baseline to begin to have the conversation and understand the complexities. I don't think anyone is void of understanding the complexities of oppression and intersecting identities. And I'm gonna put it there because I know Kristin's trying to wrap up, sorry.
No, it's fine. I definitely think that this is a conversation that we need to continue, possibly next week, or we circle back to it in some form. But I think, like I said, I think we've scratched the surface of a lot of the complexities, a lot of the problems that are going on. And I think that we're only able to continue to understand each other, continue to, I'm going to say heal, but start the process of healing at some point when we talk and share with our community. But I think this was a very fruitful and necessary conversation. And yeah, thank you all for being here today. And thank you all for being so candid and for sharing about how you're feeling. And we're going to get through this, y'all. We're going to get through it. But thank you again. Thank you all just for the viewers too. Thank you for joining in on the conversation. And we will see you next time on Stubborn Things. Have a good night, everyone.
Good night, babe.
Good night.
This little light of